Hey there. So a few videos back, you saw me tear apart a pallet, right? And I told you what an excruciating and ultimately useless exercise that was. Okay. But I still had some wood. I mean, not a lot and not high quality, but I still had some wood. So I wanted to make the table for my wife that I had mentioned to you in that video. Now, real quick, I don't want to waste your time. If you have already made something out of pallet wood, you've ripped it and you've made some cool stuff and so on and so forth, this video is not for you, okay? However, if you've never done anything like that before and you're toying with it, I'd like to share my top tips. In other words, the things that I screwed up, so that maybe your first experience can be closer to a second experience for me, if that makes any sense. Okay, so with that, I've got a list here of things that I learned throughout the making of this table right here. Let's go through them. All right, so cut depth. All right, so if you look at this table, you'll notice that, okay, the top is actually the pallet wood, okay, the top of the table. The bottom, though, is a piece of wood that I had actually purchased for this project like a year ago, and I had planned to use. Okay, so why am I pointing this out? Well, when I ripped the pallet wood, I ripped it to the size that I thought I would need it, or at least the depth, right? But that didn't account for the planing of the wood that I would do eventually, or the sanding of the wood that I would do eventually. So in other words, by cutting this to the exact measurement that I wanted, I ended up cutting it way too small, or whatever word we're going to use for that. So really give yourself some generous space when you're ripping your wood. Next thing, same sort of thing on the length of the wood. So when I was cutting the wood to length, I gave myself a little bit of, excess, a little bit of wiggle room, because I knew I'd be doing some cutting and shaping and so forth. But what I didn't anticipate is when I was gluing all the wood together, it was hard to make it square, which means that once the wood was all glued and all that sort of stuff, it was all cattywampus. It was not square at all. So I had to cut off the edges to make it square, which means that my ultimate measurement, the size of the table, was not going to be correct. So I ended up having to put this shim over on the side here to account for the, poor measurement. All right, so there you go. Hey, you'll also notice that there's some gaps here in the short pieces. Not all the pieces of the wood that I was able to cut were long enough, so I put together some shorter pieces. Well, once again, I didn't really account for spacing when putting these together, and so they're not cut at perfect, I guess it is 90-degree angles. And so in some cases, I had to use wood filler and so forth to bring them together, which is fine, but that brings me to my next point. I did not plane the wood before I put it all together. I did not prep it. I don't even have a jointer, so I couldn't take care of that, which means that when I glued all the wood together, not all of it was at the right height and looking good and so on and so forth, which means I had to use a lot of wood filler to kind of make it flat here. Now, okay, that's fine if you're going to paint it or if you're going to put a laminate on it, but I chose to go with a polyurethane, which means that this wood filler crap is ugly as hell. So if you're going to do polyurethane or something of that nature, you need to really make sure that you prep your wood properly before you put it all together. Okay, next one. gaps between the wood. Oh, yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. All right. If you look right down here, you'll notice that there's a fair gap between the pallet panel, whatever you want to call that, and the solid piece panel. Now, that gap isn't all the way around because in some places it married up nicely and in other places it didn't. Well, why is that? Well, because the pallet piece is not perfectly flat. I did run it through a planer, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I don't have a jointer. I don't even know how to use the planer. And so when I tried to marry the two pieces together and clamp them together and yada, 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 it just wasn't perfect. Okay. That brings me to the planer. I went ahead and planed the two pieces of pallet wood that I had glued together and so forth. But this is the first time I have ever used a planer. And so it was kind of a terrifying, let alone useless exercise. I even, gosh, in some cases created this sort of warp in the wood. Yeah, it's right along here. This strange where the planer kind of created this indentation, this dent. And I couldn't quite get that out with the sander and so forth. So I need to learn how to use the planer properly. So there you go. Now, it's great for the use that I have planned for this table. It's going to go over here in the corner for my wife. She has these two work surfaces here, but with a great big empty hole in the corner. So this is going to go there and give her a surface to work with, and it's going to be great. Was it worth it? You know, here's the thing. If you're going to work with pallet wood, you're not doing it because it is efficient. It's not efficient at all, okay? It takes a hell of a lot of work just to get a piece of wood that probably would have cost you 12 bucks. All right? So first, it's also not really good to work with. It takes a lot of TLC and skill, which I don't have, to make it look halfway decent. So unless you're going to really get into it, I don't know that it's worth it. Finally, you're not doing this because it's cheaper or more efficient or anything like that, because it's not cheaper, it's not more efficient. It's a mess. You're doing it because you like the look and you like being able to show it off and say, I made that out of recycled pallet wood, and have people go, woo, cool, right? So it's really a novelty material, not a really good, efficient material. Okay, there you go. So I don't know if this was helpful at all, and I don't know if I'm going to do it again. I might. I don't know. We'll figure it out. We'll see you later.